Now before I start with this review, one of the things that I should answer is what exactly is a paladin? Or, just as importantly, what should a paladin be? Looking at other games, it's pretty obvious that a paladin is essentially a tank who has a few healing abilities and also has a specialty against the undead. This is true in EverQuest, in Dungeons & Dragons, in Lineage, and who knows how many other games. It's all the same way. He's a tank and he can heal. Paladins can usually wear the strongest armor, they can usually wield most of the same weapons that a warrior can, they've got a lot of the same abilities that warriors have, and on the whole, they're like a scaled back version of the warrior with some support abilities, some anti-undead abilities, and that's pretty much it. Now let's take a look and see whether a World of Warcraft paladin actually meets that description. First, let's take a look at what warriors can do. Warriors have about 10 on-demand abilities that do decent damage, and some of these even do damage to more enemies than one. Warriors have a lot of other options to round things out. They've got some slow options, they have some interrupts, they have 5 abilities to generate threat, and not 1, not 2, but 3 taunts. All in all, they've got a pretty solid setup. When you add it all up, warriors have about 41 abilities. Now let's see how paladins measure up to that. What abilities do paladins have that are pretty close to these warrior abilities? As it turns out, only about 1 in 4 warrior abilities has some paladin equivalent to it. And some of these equivalents that I've chosen are pretty iffy. For example, Judgment of the Crusader really isn't that big a tool for generating threat, and Sunder Armor is a tool for generating threat. They can both increase damage to some extent, but they really don't have the same purpose. So what do paladins have in place of all these warrior abilities? Well, we've got some heals, we've got loads of buffs coming out our ears in fact, and I'd have to say that these self-buffs here called seals are what replace all those warriors' on-demand strike abilities. And a lot of these seals really aren't offensive options, and they're nowhere near as good as the warrior abilities. All of that being said, we're still pretty melee-oriented, and we have some pretty good tools for dealing with the undead. So, on the whole, we're kinda close to where a paladin ought to be, but we really need a lot more on-demand abilities. I mean, every other class in the game has on-demand abilities and lots of them. Why shouldn't paladins be the same way? Actually, I think a lot of the Wynedin phenomenon has to do with this, because with paladins, basically you slap on a seal and hope that the seal does what you need it to do when you need it to do it. Nothing's really guaranteed, and despite the fact that we have some pretty cool abilities attached to these seals, because they don't do what we need them to do when we need them to do it, they're really just not that good. A good example of this is Seal of Justice. With that seal active, your melee hits have a chance to stun the enemy for 2 seconds. That sounds pretty good against casters, but when you get down to it, you can't guarantee that it's going to stun the caster at the right time to interrupt their spell or anything like that. So it's really not that good a seal, even though on the surface it looks like a good idea. Admittedly, this problem has gotten better over time. For instance, Seal of Righteousness used to be a chance on hit to do additional holy damage, but now it does additional holy damage every swing. But I've got to tell you, if I'm going to talk about how paladins have changed over time, I have to tell you that when World of Warcraft first came out, paladins had some major problems with them.